This video is the second part of a video that had the first part as entitled The Lubavitch Movement. This is the second part of the video, and there might even be a third part. It depends how much I feel I can cover in this second part. The first part of the video, it was more by way of introduction and a preface, not really a preface, but an introduction to the Hasidic movement in general, starting with Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov and his successor, the Maggid from Mizrich, and his successor, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shir Zalman of Liadi, the first The+Rebbe, and then the six The+Rebbes who followed him up until this seventh The+Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. In this second part of the video, I'm going to cover very specifically what the Lubavitch movement is all about. For purposes of conceptualization, I can give two labels that describe the Lubavitch movement: Chassidus, or the Hasidic dimension of the Torah, and the Hasidic way of life, the Lubavitch Hasidic way of life, which the two are really inseparable. One second, I want to refer to my notes. So first I'll cover Chassidus, the Hasidic dimension of the Torah, which first and foremost I have to say that when we say that the Lubavitcher+Rebbe and his Lubavitcher Chassidim emphasize the Hasidic dimension of the Torah, it of course implicitly, or without having to say so openly, includes the entire Torah, even the revealed part of Torah. Things such as the 5 books of Moses, meaning the Torah scroll that we read in the synagogue, the oral Torah of the Mishnah and Gemara, the Talmud, and the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, and all the thousands of commentaries by the very big Torah scholars of all the generations. So Lubavitch are thoroughly religious Jews and observe the entire Torah according to the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. But there is, within Lubavitch, an emphasis on Chassidus, the Hasidic dimension of the Torah. And as I mentioned in the first part of this video, that the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shir Zalman of Liadi, took infinitely high godly concepts of the secrets of the Torah, the hidden inner dimension of the Torah, and brought them down to a level that even in our generation people who have just more of a regular average type intellect, even very, very smart people compared to previous very smart people in this generation, which our generation compared to previous generations is not quite as high as they were. So we can understand by learning Lubavitch-Chassidus books the deep godly secrets of the Torah, because, as I mentioned in the previous video, these infinitely high godly concepts are enclosed in regular human intellect, and by studying these concepts in Chassidus, we can become much closer to God, because we develop a great sensitivity to the godly concepts of the Torah. So in Chassidus, one second, I want to refer to my notes. In Chassidus, to summarize very briefly, because Chassidus really includes a tremendous treasure and wealth of very deep and complicated Chassidic subjects of God's Torah, but generally and briefly speaking, Chassidus emphasizes on God Almighty Himself, which in the language of Chassidus, we refer to God as the Ein Sof. Baruch Hu, may be blessed. And it teaches things about God, about how God creates the world, the nature of God's existence, His infinite existence. It talks about the Olmos Elyonim, the higher spiritual worlds that are above this physical world, and how they're all connected and have an influence on this physical world. And Chassidus talks about the spheros, the different godly levels within each world, and it also doesn't only talk about higher spiritual worlds, it talks about this physical world also very greatly. How God creates the world yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing, and it talks about, Chassidus talks about things such as the different categories of the creation, such as domain, Sameach, Chai, and Medaber, which domain is the inorganic matter of the world. Sameach is the vegetation, that dimension of the world. Chai is the animal kingdom, and Medaber is the human race. And of course, this is all through a Jewish perspective, focusing really mostly on Jews. Of course, obviously, without a need to say so, the Torah is God's way of life that He gave to the Jewish people, even though God did also give the 7 Noachide commandments to all the other peoples of the world. And of course, everything I'm talking about now is a very brief summation, very brief, and just a broad sketch of the different types of things covered in the Chassidic dimension of the Torah. And if one really wants to delve into it further, I highly encourage you to contact the Lubavitcher+Rebbe and attend regular Torah classes at his synagogue or Chabad house. So now I'm going to discuss, one second. Now I'm going to discuss very briefly and generally speaking the Chassidic way of life. The Chassidic way of life, first and foremost, can be described as being centered around the Lubavitcher+Rebbe. And in our generation, or Menachem Mendel Schneerson, as I said, the Rebbe passed away in 1994, but leads us from above. And there's a thing in Chassidus called Iskashrus, being connected to the Rebbe. That Iskashrus, connection to the Rebbe, is one of the most fundamental, if not the most fundamental aspect of Lubavitch+Chassidus, and for that matter, it also applies to other groups of Chassidim. That everything in a Chassidic movement focuses around the Rebbe of that Chassidic movement. And this is because the Rebbe is a very is a very big tzaddik, a very big high and holy righteous Jew who has attained the highest levels of perfection in serving God. Another central aspect of Lubavitcher Chassidim and the Chassidic way, Lubavitcher Chassidic way of life is Chassidic brotherhood. That is an expression in Chassidus, Chassidim Ein Mishpacha. That Lubavitcher Chassidim, and this really applies to all Chassidim, but especially Lubavitcher Chassidim, are one family. That we don't look at the Lubavitch movement as just some regular, everyday type of organization. And this is especially so because it has its roots, ultimately going back to Mount Sinai, but in the latest generations, the last 200-300 years. And it's a very strong movement, and it's a very closely knit movement. And I want to conclude this two-part lesson about the Lubavitch movement by saying that the Lubavitcher+Rebbe in 1991 and 1992 indicated to us that right now we are on the threshold of the true and complete redemption of the Jewish people, when God Almighty will gather all the Jews in the world through his appointed leader, whoever that may be, and take us, all of us Jews, back to the country of Israel and build the third holy temple, the third Beis Hamikdash, and usher in the era of the Mashiach. So that concludes this lesson about the Lubavitch movement.